Welcome back to 5 Acres Honey Farm. I'm Tara Lynn, and I put together this video today because here where I am in North Carolina, I'm just south of Chapel Hill. It is a time of year when folks are ordering packages, catching swarms, and getting started with beekeeping for the first time. So I am going to be celebrating on June 1st. I'll be celebrating 7 years keeping bees, but in the same token, I am going to be moving into my 8th summer with bees because right when I got my bees, it was, the honey flow was pretty much over that first year. So I didn't get to experience that until later. But I have experienced, at this point, 7 summers with bees already. So I'm going to be sharing 5 things that I would do differently, knowing what I know now. The first thing that I wanted to share, and I'm going to kind of show you down here, those are my 2 deeps from when I very first started beekeeping. So my very first hive equipment and my only deeps. And I decided after that first summer keeping bees that I don't want to manage deeps. And if you're getting into beekeeping, these are 10 frame Langstroth style hives. So the deep is the larger of the boxes. And when it's completely full of brood and nectar, they can be about 100 pounds each. And then they can feel like they weigh even more in the fall when propolis gets really, I guess the bees get more productive with propolis in the fall as they're insulating the hive for winter. And so that's causing the boxes to stick together. And so when you're trying to lift them, it can feel heavier than it actually is because you have to lift through all of that stickiness. I very quickly, during that first winter with the bees, I let them move their way up as the bees do through the winter. And once that deep was empty, I gave the frames to someone else. And so these two boxes that are here are empty and they make a great side table. I love it. But I didn't have to go to that expense of buying all those frames, having the bees build out comb that I can not use. And especially when you're starting out beekeeping, you generally don't have built out comb. So that becomes really valuable. And that was a big loss in that first year because fortunately that colony, I was able to split and in that first year, and they were able to build out comb in medium sizes. And that's what I use today. So first thing that I would do is just start with all mediums and just use those going forward. I do have a separate video about unboxing my first lay-ins hive, which is a horizontal hive. So as you can see, it's taken nearly 7 years for me to branch off to a different hive design, pretty much just because of time and expense. So I've just invested in trying out a different type of hive design. And otherwise though, I'm sticking with the 10 frame mediums. That works well for me. Other thing that I would do differently, and this is kind of like a mixed feeling and may not be relevant for really to many folks, but as soon as I started beekeeping after I took our county beekeeping school. So there was a lot of new information fresh in my mind, and they really encouraged folks to take the state exam for certified beekeeper at that time when you have all that knowledge really fresh there that you could draw on. So I'm glad that I did that certification, took the test, passed it, and all of that. I'm a little hesitant about endorsing like these programs where I feel like overall I totally encourage lifelong learning and education. But I got like really wrapped up in like getting to the next level. What's the next thing? 'Cause here in North Carolina, there are 4 levels. So I did get my journeyman certification. And then the next step would be master beekeeper. And I was starting to work toward that. And as I was studying for the exam last year and then outlining what volunteer credits I was going to put toward getting the certification, I just stopped and I asked, why? Why am I doing this? Why? Why am I getting the certification? I don't personally need it to validate anything. Really doesn't matter in the scheme of things. So like my own personal reason, if like I hadn't stopped to ask why I was doing this, like why was I moving on this track? And I just thought back to, well, I took the certified one. So now I have to keep going. But then I didn't really have a valid reason for myself to keep going. Perhaps someday I will, but the thing that I would do differently, like I like that I got the certified. I just don't know why I put so much pressure on myself to get journeyman and keep going on. And I'm kind of glad that I've stopped at this point because it doesn't mean that I'm not still learning and demonstrating that. I'm still, doing those activities that qualify for credits to get the certification. I'm just not taking the exam and like putting it all together and submitting it and all of that. So I'm like, it just doesn't have that validation. I think that I don't need it. So that's something I would do differently, and to really kind of think about how you want to devote your time to learning and what ways you enjoy learning most effectively and more routinely. Like, what do you want to do on an ongoing basis? Do you want to have, do you want to get a new certification every few years, or is there something that you want to master? Is there a certain type of beekeeping skill that you want to do? Like I mentioned, that I'm getting that horizontal hive set up. Maybe that's something that you want to specialize in, is a certain type of hive or a certain strain of bees. My mentor was ordering Russian queens. I think he was getting Russian hybrids because the Russian queens are even more expensive. But figuring out, like, what is it that you want to specialize in, if there is anything, and just asking why. So I feel like that's what I would do differently, is ask, why am I doing this? Number 3 is a little painful. So I'm going to see if I can find some pictures of what had happened. What had happened is I, really listened to folks during that initial beekeeping school where, folks were saying, oh, you don't really need gloves. If you do want to wear gloves, get surgical gloves because you have a lot more dexterity and you're able to manipulate the frames a lot more in an easier way than if you were wearing your official beekeeping gloves, which can be hard to manage, picking things up. So I followed that advice, and I was great for almost the first year. And just a month shy of my 1-year anniversary of keeping bees, as I was pulling a frame up, I had pulled my hand to the side. So my pinky got lodged on the side of the frame where a little worker bee had been. And so I got stung like right in the bone on my pinky. And I hadn't been stung really before, so I didn't really know what to expect. And so I was a little shocked in the moment because I'm like, am I gonna, have an anaphylactic reaction or something? I've learned from that point and any subsequent time that I've been stung is that I don't really have any physical reaction until about 48 hours after the sting. So I'm pretty good for a day or so, and then the inflammation gets wild, and the itchiness is crazy. I will itch and itch and itch. It takes about a week for the itching to go away. But what had happened with that first one is I didn't take really any anti-inflammatories. I didn't take a Benadryl or another antihistamine, and didn't know it was going to happen. And so my whole hand going up my whole arm was swollen. Like, it felt like my skin was going to explode, and it just kept feeling like it was getting bigger and bigger. So I went to the emergency room. It's a whole nother story. I won't get into it right now. But what that taught me was that you need to wear gloves so when folks say that you don't need this or that, just think about why. And maybe not everyone has the same reaction to things, and perhaps you're hearing this and you're like, I'm not going to wear gloves. That's fine too. Just know what risks are involved. I didn't realize that the bees could sting through the surgical gloves. Essentially, you're really not wearing anything. It's just your hands are getting sweaty in there, and it's just creating more of a mess. So to me, now I know to wear real beekeeping gloves, and those do prevent stings. The other thing I wanted to share, and a lot of folks say that backyard chickens are the gateway to homesteading, and I like to say that the bees were. Even though I already had chickens before I had bees, I had absolutely no interest in gardening at all until I got bees. And then I was curious about what could I plant for them? And if I'm going to spend the time and energy planting something, what can I plant that will be beneficial to the bees and for me? So I speak to beekeeping clubs about those multitasking plants for pollinators. I have a blog post about it, which I'll link in the description. And that got me really interested in growing food. And then went down a whole rabbit hole, and now I'm fairly obsessed with it. So the thing that I would have liked to have known earlier is I would have liked to have known about gardening, because I made a lot of gardening mistakes while learning about bees, and it was just a lot going on at one time. And so I would have liked to have had some gardening skills before getting bees to help have some extra forage in the area for them, and also to understand a little bit more about what they are attracted to seasonally, and what native pollinators are interested in too. The last piece that I will leave you with, and I will take you out to the bee yard to give you a better idea of what this looks like. And I believe it was Tom Seeley who had done this research, and I cannot find where this research is. I'm not sure if I read it in a print article or heard it on a podcast or something, but I can't find something to link to for this. But I believe it was his research that showed that setting up your hive stands in a C shape or a U shape, however you're looking at it, helps prevent drift between the colonies. So that can help prevent varroa mites from distributing between colonies. If the worker bee is going back to the wrong colony, she could be bringing back a disease and then bringing it to another colony on her next flight out. So not spacing the hives too close together and not having them in a straight line. So for my first few years, I just kept making my line longer and longer. And then once I learned about that research, I've started to slowly move my hive stands into more of a C shape, U shape, horseshoe shape, however shape, similar to that. Here's the bee yard for your reference. And this is my latest split here on the end, but you can see I've got the cinder blocks on a bit of an angle. So when I inspect, probably in the next week, I'm actually going to be moving those hive stands even more closer to a C shape, and it'll continue. Usually it's around this time of the year, getting out of winter, moving into spring, that I'll start to shift the hive stands a little bit more and a little bit more, because they're at their lightest right now. So that was something that I would have liked to have known from the beginning, because I could have set up the apiary from that way from day one. So those are the 5 things that I would do differently if I was going to start beekeeping today. And I'm sure 7 or 8 years from now, I'll have another 5 things to share of what I might do differently, because there is always something to learn when you're keeping bees, and it never stays the same. So please let me know how you've changed your beekeeping skills and practices if you have been keeping bees for a while, and if you are just getting started, how you're thinking of managing your hives and how you're gonna incorporate this into your practices, or maybe you've heard some other tips that you're trying to consider too. So I'd love to hear about those. And as I continue, I'll continue to share more next time.